Hello, peoples of the internet. I'm Mo, and I am here today with my top reads of 2015. So I don't have one of those standard roundish numbers. I just went in and thought, which books do I want to talk about that were favorites that I read this year? And I believe I ended up with 7. Yes, 7 books. So the first 4 I'm going to talk about are not ranked. They're in no particular order. They're all very different from each other. I don't really know how to compare them. But they're books that I read this year that I really enjoyed and wanted to talk to you guys about. And then my last 3 I do have ranked. So I'm going to get right into them. The first one is a book I did not expect to be on this list for me. I actually read it back in January, so about a year ago. And at the time, I think I gave it 3 stars when I put it into my Goodreads account. It was just... I liked it, but it was not at all what I was expecting, and I think that caused me to give it a lower rating. And then a couple months later, I was thinking about it, and I went, I need to go raise that, so I put it up to 4 stars. And then recently, I've been thinking about it again, so this is part of the reason it's on this list. It's kind of stuck with me. I've been thinking about this book all year, apparently. And I was thinking, maybe I should move it up to 5 stars. I don't remember if I actually did. It's probably more like 4.5, but there is no half feature on Goodreads. But anyway, this is a book I've mentioned a couple times here, and that is The Grey Horse by R.A. McAvoy. This is a historical fantasy novel. It's very literary in style, and it is set in the 1800s in Ireland, and it follows a fairy who's a shapeshifter. He can be either look like a human or like a horse. And he moves into this little town because he's decided that he's in love with this girl and he wants to marry her. And what he doesn't realize is that he's going to have to learn a whole lot about humans and human culture and politics and religion and all of this stuff if that's ever going to happen. And so it's really the story of this town itself and about how the people view each other and interact with each other. So you have political tensions and things between the people who grew up Irish and the people who have moved in from England into the area. You have also religious things going on with he's a fairy and they're all Catholic and all of this different social stuff, which is really what this book is all about. And the characters are just wonderful. They're so well-rounded. They're so real. The main girl in the story, Mary, is just this great, strong female character who's feisty and no-nonsense, and when she first meets this guy is like, I can't marry you, you're not Catholic, which I thought was a wonderfully realistic response for a character to make. And I love that it came before you're not the same species as me, which... yeah, but anyway, overall, it's really just about people, and it's about relationships and how people interact with each other, and yeah, it was really well written. Highly recommend it. The next one I want to talk about, I actually just finished this past month, so I haven't talked about it on my channel yet at all, and that is City by Clifford D. Simak. This is a science fiction novel. It was written back in, I want to say the 50s. I may be remembering incorrectly. But this is kind of a novel, kind of a series of short stories. It's set in a world where there are no humans, and the highest form of intelligent life is dogs. And it's set up as if it were like a textbook or a book of literary criticism of sorts that is telling all of these old myths and legends about humanity, and then in between each of the stories there are like notes by this sort of scholarly academic dog who is writing this book. And so he talks about how the impact that these stories have had on doggish society and the different theories that dog historians have about where these stories came from, and the different arguments that these theorists have with each other about their theories as to whether humans ever actually existed or not, whether they were created by some doggish author, etc. And it's really weird, but it's really wonderful. I really enjoyed the way that it was all put together as well. When you start out at the beginning, it really does seem like this weird collection of sci-fi short stories with like dogs talking about them in between. But the farther you get through the book, the more they come together and start to connect, and you really get to see it as this big picture of what is going on and what is happening with humanity over span of thousands of years in this story. You also get some stories, one of them is set on another planet, one of them is kind of set in another dimension, I suppose. So there's a lot of very different sci-fi things going on in the stories themselves, and then you pull out of it and you get to see the dogs talking about it, and it's very thought-provoking in that it's very reminiscent of the way that our own historians and critics and other people talk about history and their theories and the sorts of things that are assumed and the sorts of evidence that people are willing to accept or not. And yeah, I just really enjoyed the whole thing and definitely recommend this book. If that sounds interesting to you at all, I think you should pick it up. The next one I actually did a full review for, so I will be linking that down below and won't be talking too much about it here, and that is The Penelope Ad by Margaret Atwood. This is a retelling of the Odyssey, but it's from the point of view of Penelope, the spirit of Penelope, so she's in the underworld as she's telling this story, who is Odysseus's wife, and it's also narrated by the spirits of her maids who were killed in that original story. And it's really a social commentary, and it talks a lot about the way that society views people from different segments of society and different groups and how it treats them based on those views. And yeah, very Margaret Atwood. It's definitely a feminist book. It's also this weird, sort of creepy, eerie way that it is retold. I will mention I listened to this on audiobook instead of reading a physical book, and I definitely think that that is the way to go. Some of the chapters are narrated by the maids as a chorus, and so I think if you're just reading it, you just kind of get that one voice in your head, whereas when you listen to the audiobook, it is actually like a chorus of voices speaking in unison, and it gives you this really eerie, creepy effect that is really what I think the author was going for with these murdered spirits who are all talking and telling this story of how they were killed. And so yeah, if you're thinking about looking into that one, I would definitely recommend the audio version, and if you want to hear me talk more about it, I will leave a link to my review down below. The next one I also did a review for. I actually have, here it is, a physical book. I also did a review for this. I wasn't sure if I was going to be putting it on this list, but I am. If you watched my review earlier this year, you know that I had some issues with The Diamond Age when I read it. I still have those issues, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this really is a quality piece of work. This is a cyberpunk novel, and it follows a young girl from the slums who's growing up in a really just bad situation, and she gets a hold of a piece of advanced interactive technology, and this book follows her and how that technology really affects her life as she grows up, and then ultimately affects her world as a whole. The world building in this is immense and wonderful, and there's just so much that happens in this book, and I don't know how he crams it into those 500 pages, but he does, because Neil Stephenson is amazing. And yeah, I think that's all I want to say about it here. If you want to hear more about it, I did do a review, which I will link down below. I will say that this is definitely an adult book. It is not YA, and that has a slight connection to the problem that I had with it as well. So yeah, if you're looking into it, there are some rather intense situations that happen in here, but overall, the way that the story is pulled together is amazing. All right, and the three that I have left are the three that I have ranked. You call it ranked, that's how you say it. All right, so my number 3 book for the year was The Boy Who Lost Fairyland by Catherynne Valenti. This is the 4th book in her Fairyland series, which is a middle grade series. It's a portal fantasy. about this girl named September who gets pulled into fairyland. So the first 3 books in the series follow September. This is the 4th book, and it actually follows a different character. And he is a troll. And as a young troll, he is taken from his home and disguised as a human and switched out for a human baby in Chicago in the 1950s. And so he has to grow up in that environment, trying to figure out this strange world that he's living in and why he doesn't make any sense in it and why he doesn't fit there, because he has forgotten who and what he is, essentially. And so it's about his journey, trying to figure those things out, and then once he has discovered who he is, trying to get back to fairyland. And the writing is wonderful, and I have to say, I just loved his character, and I was surprised because Valenti made me love trolls. And if you read fantasy, trolls are normally this, stupid, big, bumbling creatures who can't go out in the sunlight. But Valenti's trolls are so different. They're these wordsmiths who talk hills into becoming houses, and they just love beautiful things, and they value intelligence and all this other stuff, and these trollish things are still a part of him even when he looks like he's human, and are part of what make him very confusing to the rest of society. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book overall. I would not read this out of order if you have not read the series. Definitely start from the beginning. There are spoilers, lots of spoilers in this book for what's happening in the first 3 books. And then the 5th book, which is going to be the final one, is coming out this month, and I think end of January, so I'm very excited for that and to see what the end of this series turns out to be like. Book number 2 for the year for me. This is one that I loved. I don't know that it's a book that everyone would like, and that is The Gods of Pagana by Lord Dunsany. This was written back in the 1800s. It's one of the early fantasy books. I wouldn't call it a novel necessarily. Some people would call it a collection of short stories, which it kind of is, but they're connected. It's really an invented mythology. It's the story of a whole world, and it's not character-driven, it's not plot-driven, and so it's really hard to describe it because it's not like a lot of things. It's almost atmosphere-driven, I think I would say, and it just uses this beautiful language throughout. And so since I really have trouble talking about this book, I am going to actually read you guys like a paragraph out of here. And here we go. I lay in the desert beyond all cities and sounds, and above me flowed the river of silence through the sky, and on the desert's edge night fought against the sun and suddenly conquered. Then on the river I saw the dream-built ship of the god Yoharnathlahai, whose great prow lifted gray into the air above the river of silence. Her timbers were olden dreams, dreamed long ago, and poets' fancies made her tall, straight masts. And her rigging was wrought out of the people's hopes. Upon her deck were rowers with dream-made oars, and the rowers were the people of men's fancies, and princes of old story, and people who had died, and people who had never been. So that's just a sample of what the writing and the feeling of this book is like. It's not something that you come out of and you remember all of the plot points. It's really just this sense of awe and wonder that Dunsany captures so well, and I've read like 2 or 3 more of his books since I picked this one up a few months ago, so definitely hoping to read more of his stuff because this was just wonderful. And my top book that I read in 2015, many of you have probably already guessed, and it is A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter M. Miller Jr. This is a vintage sci-fi novel. It was written back in the 60s, I believe, and it is phenomenal. This follows a group of monks who are trying to preserve knowledge after the apocalypse has been essentially blamed on science and learning. And so it starts out in this post-apocalyptic dystopian world, and you get to follow them as they are smuggling and copying books and storing them away for the future. and you follow them through time as you get to watch the world being rebuilt. And then you also see later on in years to come, when the technology is back and learning has been reinstituted, that the world is coming once again to deal with these issues that had caused the first apocalypse. And just getting to watch all of that happen through the eyes of these characters. And the characters are the second reason that this book is amazing. All of the characters in this are just so very real and so vivid. And you really get to see where they're all coming from and these different perspectives. And one of the things I really loved about this book is that the conflicts in here are not about good guys versus bad guys. They're about all of these people who have good intentions, who have different views of the world. And because they have different views of what is good and what is bad and what is necessary, they take different sides and come into conflict with each other. And so while you do identify with the protagonists, you also really understand the antagonists and maybe even agree with them as opposed to the protagonists. And I think it works really well for anyone to read this book, even though obviously the main characters being monks are religious, because all of the characters are portrayed so very well, and the author does a good job of not taking sides in that sense, but just really writing them as people and letting you watch and make up your own mind about it. And yeah, it's just wonderfully written. It's highly thought-provoking. It's a must-read. I really recommend it to everybody. So if you like sci-fi, or if this sounds interesting at all, you should definitely pick this one up. I'm going to stop gushing about it now. So those were my top reads for the year of 2015. Let me know what your favorite books were or least favorite books were this past year that you read. I will be seeing you guys again soon with my December wrap-up and some things for 2016 coming your way fairly soon, hopefully, if I find time to film. But yeah, I will be seeing you guys next time. Bye.